Good morning to you all. We are still having people coming into the lobby, so we will give it a few more minutes before we kick off.
The Nordic Swan Ecolabel was established in 1989 by the Nordic Council of Ministers as an eco-labeling scheme for the Nordic countries Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Today, it's the official eco-label of the Nordic countries and the most recognized environmental label in the region. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel makes it easy for the consumer, businesses, and institutions to contribute to the green transition. Every day in the Nordic countries alone, 27 million people make hundreds of millions of choices.
The Nordic Swan Ecolabel is, for me as a consumer, the most important brand and tool for me to actually make good environmentally safe choices. So as Nordics, we have the possibility to actually be in the forefront in the green transition.
Welcome everybody, and good morning to you all. We are very excited to gather so many people here today to launch our new criteria for building operations. The agenda for today, my name is Bjørn Glav Strandli. I am the Nordic market responsible for this product group in the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And the agenda for today, we will talk and kick off with some market perspectives and added value with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. Then my good colleague Stinus from Denmark will present the new criteria for you. And we will talk a little bit about how you can certify with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And at the end of the session, we will have a good time for questions and answers. So, if you have any questions and would like some answers, please hold on as we have wrapped up our presentation. You can submit your questions in the Q&A function on the top menu in Teams. If you see a question that you like in particular, or you have the same question, you can like this question so we can rate them and raise the questions that are important to many of you. And last but not least, the webinar will be recorded and the recording has started. So again, a warm welcome to you all. Very happy to see so many of you in this webinar this morning. To run us through this 1.5 hour, we have myself, Bjørn Ole, and we have my good colleague and environmental expert from Denmark, Stinus Kappel Andersen. And with us to run the quiz and Q&A function, we have Joel from Sweden. So a very Nordic webinar this is, and looking forward to having a good time with you here today. Many of you know the Nordic Swan Ecolabel logo, but not everybody knows what the Nordic Swan Ecolabel stands for. So I will kick off by saying a few words about that. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel is the official ecolabel in the Nordic countries. It's established by the government, the Nordic Council of Ministers. It is a life cycle based ecolabel run on a non-profit basis, and our main goal is to make it easy to do the environmental best choices in the market. We are an independent third-party certification, certifying goods and services in many industries. And this is how we work. We have a life cycle perspective to everything we do. That means that we set environmental requirements to all substantial environmental impact in the whole life cycle of a product or a service lifetime. So that means we start with the raw materials, what's going into this production. Then we set requirements through the production process. We set requirements in the consumption phase, securing long lifetime and good quality of goods and services. And then we have a lot of requirements stimulating to good waste and recycling handling. And all of this is, of course, to stimulate to a circular economy when we can use products over and over and over again. And the fantastic news now is that this thinking has now been implemented on a full scale when it comes to the Nordic Swan Ecolabel in the building industry. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel has historically had requirements for building products and building materials. We've been working a lot with new buildings. We have requirements for renovation. And with these new requirements for building operations and requirements stimulating to good waste handling and circular economy in all these criteria documents, we are closing the loop and making the Nordic Swan Ecolabel a relevant tool in the whole life cycle of your building portfolio. And you don't necessarily have to stop with the building. We have a lot of exciting requirements that can also fill up the buildings. So you can, for example, Nordic Swan Ecolabel your coffee service. You can Swan label your food service and conference facilities, cleaning service, office supplies, and furniture. So it's possible to take a very solid grip on the environmental and climate work, working with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And the growth in Nordic Swan Ecolabel buildings, talking about new buildings and renovation projects, has been substantial the last couple of years. This is a graph showing the number of housing units that is on the market now with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel, from 10,000 housing units in 2018 to over 80,000 in 2023. And the map showing the distribution of these housing units, this is school, kindergartens, office buildings, apartment buildings, small houses, and so on. Sweden has really been showing the way forward together with Denmark. Norway is really coming up to speed now, together with Finland. So why has this been such a huge success for the building industry? I'm now going to show you 3 main reasons for this happening and why this could also be a brilliant tool for the building operation companies. First of all, it is a practical tool working with environmental and climate issues. You get one point of contact through the whole process, getting access to environmental specialists, guiding you through the process, answering questions, checking documentation, doing audits, and so on. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel has one level with absolute requirements, giving clarity and comparability. So either you are Nordic Swan Ecolabel or you are not. This makes it very easy to compare different companies and different services to each other because they are all answering to the same level. You can use our systems. We have digital application systems. You will get access to guidance, and of course you will get access to the Nordic Swan Ecolabel cookbook to how to work with environmental issues in your business. So you can really use the Nordic Swan Ecolabel as a backbone for your environmental work, structuring it and systemizing together with us. While doing this and systemizing and structuring your environmental work together with us, it is also a very important factor that you along the way will secure third-party verified documentation, that because we have checked and controlled as the official Ecolabel in the Nordics, we have checked and controlled your documentation and given you the good to go stamp, sort of. The second reason why it is a good idea to start working with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel is the brand awareness of the label. There is a mistrust gap between customers and companies. Is there some...
Sorry, yeah, I just got some chat messages about not seeing the presentation, so I just wanted to see if it's a big problem if the presentation is not shown or if it's just some of our participants. It seems okay, so it seems most of you can see it, so that's good. So maybe if you that cannot see it, check the view setting for the meeting if that's to something else other than the presentation, or if that doesn't work, try to exit the meeting and then entering it again, see if that works. Sorry for interrupting, Björn Olav. It seems to be working.
Perfect, Joel. Important interruption. Yeah, but happy to see that it seems to be working for most of you. Yeah, looks good. Yeah. So to continue, there has been established a mistrust gap between the businesses and the customers over the years. This is a study, a Nordic consumer study that we do regularly to check how consumers are viewing green communication and what their opinion on environmental issues are and so on. So 85% believe that businesses exaggerate how eco-friendly their products are. And 78% find products to often be marketed as green without any explanation. This is an environmental issue in itself, because if we want to make a change, we need to have the customers with us and make them feel like they are contributing when buying green. 81% think it's important that labeling schemes are objective and independent of the products that they are certifying. Only 28% trust in the manufacturer's own certifications, and 70% trust in third-party certifications. And the Nordic Swan Ecolabel has record high knowledge in 2024. 97% of the Nordic consumers know the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. But maybe most important, 86% trust that a product is a good environmental choice if it is labeled with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And 77% believe the Nordic Swan Ecolabel makes it easy to make good environmental choices. So the conclusion is that the Nordic Swan Ecolabel can be an important tool to close this mistrust gap between the customers and the companies. It makes communication easy and effective, and makes it possible for you to make yourself attractive to customers, your employees, and your customers' employees. The third thing I'm going to talk about is legislation. The EU is rolling out a high number of environmental climate legislations these days, and it can be hard to keep track. So we will focus on 3 areas in this webinar. It will be the stop to greenwashing that the EU Commission is now putting out. We will talk a little bit about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and how the Nordic Swan Ecolabel relates to that. And last but not least, the EU taxonomy. So these numbers that I showed you with this mistrust gap has been acknowledged in the EU as an environmental issue in itself. So the EU wants to put a stop to all these false claims and vague claims. So they are now proposing to prohibit the use of environmental claims where it cannot be documented. Eco, green, climate friendly, and so on. They want to prohibit claims about the whole product when it in reality only part of the product is affected. And third, they want to prohibit the use of eco-labels, sustainability labels that are not based on an independent third-party verification system established by public authorities. So it is very important when going into sustainability work that you also have in mind how to get verification on your documentation and how you will document on your green claims. So in short, as we say it, in the future, there will be no, if there are no documentation, there will be no communication. The Nordic Swan Ecolabel gives the green light and is accepted by the EU on this field to communicate about sustainability. So you are in the safe zone with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. That is the short message. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive will set a high standard for companies when they are to report on sustainability in the future. It is a comprehensive and game-changing system for sustainability reporting that will demand quite a lot of resources from companies when writing their annual sustainability report, for example. And we are, of course, very interested in making this as effective as possible for the companies that we work with. So we are now comparing the Nordic Swan Ecolabel criteria with the CSRD criteria to see how they align and how they can drag on each other. Are there things in our criteria that can be used to report in CSRD? And we have done a comparison on some product groups now and find that they correlate quite well. But this is ongoing work. But we have a clear goal to be a good tool when working with CSRD. And last, the EU taxonomy. It is not the difficult thing about the taxonomy is that it's not these days. It's not always that clear how it's going to be handled for different industries, and not everything is ready. For new buildings, it's quite well prepared, and for new buildings, we have included and implemented the EU taxonomy directly in the criteria document. In the criteria document, we give an overview of how you can align with the EU taxonomy using our criteria. For these requirements, it's been a bit more difficult because everything is not ready. But it's a clear message from us that we are going to be a good tool to work with the sustainability, and we will implement the EU taxonomy in our criteria documents as soon as we see that we can do that and everything is ready. So that was my market introduction, and now I will give the word to my Danish colleague Stinus, which will present the criteria and a little bit about how you can certify with the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. So Stinus, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I will just have to take charge here of the presentation. Bjørn Olav, is it looking okay now? Yes. Can you hear me all? Yeah, everything is good.
Good, Stinus.
Yeah. So thank you for the introduction, Bjørn Olav. My name is Stinus. I am normally working as the Nordic project manager for our criteria for new buildings and also renovation. And for the time being, I am also handling this criteria document for building operations. And I will try now to give you some introduction and some background to the requirements that are in this new criteria. And I just have to check that. Yes. Well, so first of all, before we dig into the requirements, this is like a brief overview of what a typical process would be if you wish to apply for the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And actually here I put in the first arrow that application is submitted, but normally you would have quite a lot of dialogue with some of the consultants in the national countries to dig a bit into, well, is this project, is this building, is it the right project here to start a certification? So that actually you would normally have some dialogue beforehand. Then you'll submit an application. After this, you will have the kickstart meeting with the appointed consultant in the Nordic Swan Ecolabel organization. And then you'll start up a certification process where you document the requirements pretty much one by one and get feedback until you're done. And then it is always finalized with an audit at the specific site, and then you will get the Nordic Swan Ecolabel in the end. So this is the overall process, and I think one of my points today is that please reach out to your national representatives to have this pre-application dialogue, so that if you have projects in mind, then you will know what to do and how to work with it. So now let's dig a bit into the actual requirements. And first of all, it's of course interesting to see what can actually carry the Nordic Swan Ecolabel. And it is the building operation for a building that can be labeled. So the license is on the service and must have a specific building as a frame for the operational performance. That means that both property owners who operate their own buildings and building operation contractors can become licensees. And then another question is, of course, which buildings can then actually, can the operation be performed on? And here we have chosen to align this criteria with the criteria set for new buildings. And that means that buildings classified as residential buildings, office buildings, educational buildings, but also buildings for health centers and clinics can be certified in this first generation of the criteria. And I think it's important here to note that, well, it can be both new and older buildings that can apply for a license. It just pretty much depends on the performance of the buildings, and I will show you that later on. Good. So let's have a look at the main focus areas for this criteria. The focus area for energy and climate change are two big and quite important areas in these criteria. Then we also have indoor climate, which cover something like harmful substances, moisture, air quality, and so on. We have requirements for water, recycling, reuse, waste management, the outdoor environment surrounding the buildings, but including biodiversity, and then for materials and chemicals used. And then in addition to this, we of course have some, general requirements and requirements regarding the management of the building operation company as such. And I will now give you an introduction to each of the focus areas and requirements. And some of them we will look a bit more into details, and some we will explain more briefly. So I recommend that you go into the criteria set to see the exact writing and what is actually required in detail. As well, we will not have the time to look into all these details during today's session. So please keep that in mind, and then take your time to scroll or read through all the requirements on your own afterwards. But when I am done with this, going through the various sections, then in the end, we will also show you an overview of all the requirements, so you get the big picture. Yes. And I can see that he just posted a link to the criteria document, if any of you want to follow. We will go through the sections pretty much one by one, so you will be able to have a look there as well, either now or afterwards, of course, will probably be the easiest. Good. Well, let's start from the top, and that is the general requirements. All these requirements are just basic or fundamental requirements where the applicant must provide some basic information about their own business and the building on which the service is performed. So we basically know what are we working with. And then we have also added a requirement for annual follow-up, where we make it clear which requirements that will be controlled annually. And this requirement is included since some of the requirements are based on, routines, for instance, and therefore it is necessary to have this annual control, to make sure that the licensees actually comply with the criteria set. And in that requirement, you will find the basic list showing what will always be controlled every year. And then there's also an appendix showing, what will be controlled once in a while. So to make it clear what is done every year and what is done, accordingly, to yeah, maybe every second, every third year. That depends. But it should be clear in this annual follow-up. It is not a lot, I should say, but it is meant to ensure that you are always compliant with the requirements all the way through the lifetime of your license. So if we move on to the chapter covering management, we there have 4 different overall requirements or topics. First, we have a maintenance plan, where the applicant must ensure that they have a maintenance plan which is specific to the building in question. And this maintenance plan must contain a description of planned maintenance measures, actions, technical lifespan of installations and maintenance intervals. And then furthermore, the applicant must specify some routines for regular follow-ups and updates in the maintenance plan. Then we also have a more general requirement covering the training of employees, where the licensee must have a procedure to ensure that employees who participate in this daily operation and management of the building, they must complete some training on the environmental practices connected to the building. Yes. In addition to this, the licensee must ensure that the users of the buildings, they have sufficient information about, well, the general consumption data of the building and general information on what holding a Nordic Swan Ecolabel means and how their behavior can help reduce, for instance, energy and water use. And this can seem somewhat fluffy, but the reason that we have this requirement is that the actions of the user actually influences the overall building performance quite a lot. And we consider that information here is a quite effective way to create awareness. And that is why we actually consider this an important requirement. And then in the end, we also have a quite general requirement that the licensee must have a system for handling faults and complaints from tenants. Good. So that was the management part. So if we move on to the area regarding energy, this is an area which is one of the most important ones for our criteria. And the energy use during the use phase of a building is something that is really important to reduce, of course. And we see that there is a great potential for improvement in existing buildings. So first, an important factor to be able to improve is, of course, to ensure that we have control and knowledge about the energy consumption. So because of this, we require that the building must have a metering system where the energy for heating, cooling, property electricity are measured separately, but on a building level. And this creates some better knowledge about the specific building, and it also enables the reduction of the energy consumption. So in combination with this, we also have requirements on continuous operation optimization. And this is where the applicant must have some building-specific procedures to ensure optimization and energy efficiency. That includes routines for follow-up of systems for instance, ventilation, heating, cooling, routines for adjustments of set points, for example. So this is important since this is also proven to reduce the overall energy consumption of the buildings. Furthermore, we have some specific requirements on the operation and maintenance instructions within the building, where the applicant must have these instructions for the specific building, which are easily accessible and tailored to the specific systems in those buildings. And then additionally, we have set some energy efficiency requirements for new purchases of white goods. And here we require the same levels as in the Nordic Swan Ecolabeled new buildings, but please note that this only covers purchasing of new equipment. So we do not require you, of course, to change everything at once, but when you change, you should comply with this requirement. Yes. And then last but not least, the requirement for the energy action plan, and I want to show that a bit more in detail. So overall, the requirement for energy action plan is based on the energy performance certificates and is divided into 3 main parts. They also, shown to the left of the table. So first, we have a lower, you could say, minimum level that all buildings must live up to, and that means that we will exclude the buildings performing the worst, basically. So if you have such a building, then we instead will refer to, for instance, our criteria for renovation, and then they can improve their energy performance before they apply here. And if we just want to exemplify that, if you take Sweden, that would be the case for buildings in class F and G. So secondly, if you have a really high energy efficient buildings, for instance, you built it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, most likely you would end up in this category. Then we will say, well, no immediate energy measures are necessary because it was built. And in Sweden, that would, for instance, be class C. And then last, we have an option for those buildings which are, you can say, above the minimum limit in section A, but below the limit in section B. And in Sweden, that would be the buildings classified as D and E. So these buildings would need to go through an energy audit and reduce their energy consumption. And that would be then corresponding to the class that they started in. So if you are in E, it's 20, and if you are in D, it's 10%. And of course, we recognize that these type of measures may not be within the budget or from the beginning, or can be done really fast. So we allow licensees here for a 3-year window to improve their building if you are in these middle areas. Yes. And yes, we are, of course, aware that a lot is happening in the market regarding energy class levels and so on. So if new legislation comes into place during the validity period of the criteria, we will assess the requirement and adjust accordingly. And that would, of course, mean trying to translate as directly as possible to the new legislation, so we don't make it easier or stricter. Yes, and as you will see, the systems vary a bit in the different Nordic systems, but just refer to the one in your country alone. We don't have the same scales and levels and so on, so that's why it's looking a bit different. Good. Then we have some requirements for climate change adaptation. So this area is aimed to be aligned with the EU taxonomy. And here we require that a climate risk and vulnerability analysis of the building and property must be performed. So it will be mandatory to perform a screening of which physical climate risks, both geographically and in the building's vicinity, that may affect the performance of the building during its expected lifetime. And then based on those risks, it's also mandatory to analyze the building's ability to withstand the identified climate threats. And these analyses must further result in a list of necessary climate adaptation measures. Second, we require that the identified climate adaptation measures must be implemented in the maintenance plan as a part of the adaptation to changing climate for the building. And since this is an ongoing process, we also require the licensee to have routines for implementing the climate adaptation measures in at least in connection with maintenance, renovation, reconstruction projects, and also reviewing the climate adaptation measures every 5 years. But as I said, this section is quite closely related to the EU taxonomy. Good. Let's move on to indoor climate or indoor environment, where we require that the building must have gone through a survey to assess any moisture or water damage. That is, of course, to ensure identification of potential moisture problems within the buildings. We also require that the licensee must have routines for addressing moisture and water damage in the building and have routines for working with moisture prevention, including, for example, regular inspections. We also require that the applicants must have some building-specific procedures, that is to ensure satisfactory air quality, ventilation, thermal comfort, including, for example, routines for follow-up of systems and addressing deviations directly. With regard to radon and Legionella, then the licensee must be able to show compliance with national limit values for the building to avoid any health issues there. Yes. Then regarding the inventory of asbestos and PCB, we require that all buildings constructed before 2005 must have gone through a hazardous material survey that covers asbestos and PCB. And if any harmful substances are found, then we further require that the maintenance plan must be supplemented with this information. And there must be instructions and routines for future maintenance work and improvements. So, for example, there must be routines describing how these hazardous building materials and installations will be replaced and handled in the future. Regarding measurement of PCB, we require that in cases where PCB have been identified in the building, then PCB must be measured in the indoor air, and you must then here be below a threshold limit of 300 nanograms PCB per cubic meter air. And if the level of PCBs exceeds this limit value, then actions must be taken to remove the PCB or somehow else handle it in order to lower the limits or to lower the measurements below the threshold limits. Yes. Then there is a section for water, and here we have 4 different requirements. First, we require that there is 1 submeter for each individual building to measure and track the water usage. Secondly, the applicants must have building-specific procedures to ensure water efficiency, including, for example, routines for reading, monitoring, and logging the water consumption. Then, with regard to purchase of sanitary tapware, we demand that when there is a need to replace the water equipment, as well, it's the same approach as with white goods really, then the new requirement must live up to some specific standards regarding water and energy efficiency. And this requirement is one of the requirements where we have tried to align the limits with the EU taxonomy. So that is typically a limit on water flow, for instance. Further, to progress in improving water savings, we have developed one requirement where we intend to improve the buildings, but also allow some flexibility for investments. And here we require that one water saving technology or measure must be implemented. And if it's not implemented at the time of application, then the applicant has 1 year to implement these measures. Good. I'll just see how we're doing on time. Good. In the area for recycling, reuse, and waste management, we have 3 different requirements. The first requirement that requires that there must be clear and available information on how the users of the building can improve their waste sorting through their behavior and how they should sort their waste. Further, for residential buildings, there must be instructions on how the waste is sorted and where fractions that cannot be sorted in the waste room, for instance, can be left. Further, for educational and office buildings, we have included a minimum number of fractions for sorting vessels within the building. Then there's a requirement for promotion of repair and reuse for tenants. And here we require that the licensee must implement one measure that encourages the reuse and sharing of materials and components among tenants. So this could, for example, be that the licensee provides a workspace conditioned for repairing, a system where tools and items can be borrowed, or that they provide a system where items can change ownership. Last, we also require that the licensee must offer at least one measure which supports tenants in relation to building improvements and tenant adaptation. So this could, for example, be offering tenants a reuse inventory, offer tenants reuse components instead of new ones, or offering a tenant to fix and repair components instead of changing them. Yes, then we have a quite relatively short section for the outdoor environment and biodiversity, and it just consists of one single requirement, but that requirement has multiple aspects really. So first, for all properties with garden or outdoor areas, the use of herbicides is prohibited, while the use of other pesticides is restricted. So that, for instance, means that you cannot do weed control, but if you have a wasp's nest somewhere where you can't access it otherwise, then you can use a pesticide to get rid of that. Additionally, any de-icers used must be eco-labeled. Secondly, for properties with outdoor areas exceeding 1,000 square meters, then some specific measures are required. And for example, that means that removal and control of foreign and invasive species, and that they must protect any features with high natural value. That could be old large trees, for instance. So that was that section. Finally, we have a last focus area which considers chemicals and materials for services and products used within the building operation. And it's important to note here that these requirements, they only apply when you purchase new materials and chemicals. So regarding cleaning products and services, here we require that if an external cleaning service is used in the building, then that service must be eco-labeled. Otherwise, if an external cleaning service is not used, then the cleaning products used for cleaning common areas must be eco-labeled. Then looking at the requirements for other eco-labeled services, this requirement applies to the properties that hire some specific services and where the responsibility for hiring belongs to the building owner or the building operation provider. So where this applies, then it's required that canteen services and textile services must be eco-labeled. In addition to this, there are 3 requirements that cover some prohibitions on the use of PVC, copper, and a list of restricted tree species. For those of you who are familiar with the criteria for new buildings, they are there as well. However, there are some exemptions that you can see in the requirement. Further, then we have the requirement for wood and bamboo, which basically requires certified raw materials whenever you purchase new products. Then we also have one requirement in this chapter, which regards the routines and procedures within the licensed company to ensure the fulfillment of the procurement of chemicals and materials. And that is, of course, just to help you ensure that you set up a good system to ensure that you actually remember to comply whenever you purchase new materials. Yes. And then at last, I want to show you the requirement on the eco-label products as such. And in this requirement, we require that certain products must be eco-labeled when it's used in the operation and maintenance of the buildings. So we have conducted a market analysis to identify the availability of eco-labeled products in the different markets, and we ended up with this list of products. So, however, note that reused products are not covered by this requirement, so all relevant products from the list can therefore either be bought, reused, or eco-labeled. Please also note that the products that cannot be reused per definition, of course, always need to be eco-labeled. That could, for instance, be paints. Yes. So Furthermore, I also want to add, just to make it clear, that any minor repairs or interventions, such as repairing a small section of a parquet floor, that is not covered by this requirement. So that was the introduction to all the new, you could say, focus areas and requirements for this new criteria for building operation. So if we take a look at this overview, then we can see that all the requirements, this is all the requirements that are included. It's only mandatory requirements. We have 38 of them, and it's distributed across these 9 different areas. And then if you have a look at the criteria for building operations that we looked at today, in relation to our other requirements for buildings, then we find some synergies there. Here it comes. So for instance, if you have a certified building within the Nordic Swan Ecolabel new buildings, either generation 3 or 4, then you will automatically fulfill 8 of the requirements. That is the ones that are in a bit lighter more light gray tone here. So that could, for instance, be the case if you, as an investor, have invested in a Nordic Swan Ecolabel building and then you want to operate it according to these requirements afterwards. Then you will already have 8 requirements in place, so to speak. The same goes for renovation. Here you will automatically fulfill 5 requirements in this criteria set, and again they are shown here. So Bjørn Olav already said a few words, and I will say just a few things about our criteria in relation to the EU taxonomy as well. So first of all, I mean, as the official Nordic Ecolabel, it is of course important for us to follow and as far as possible trying to align ourselves with regulations and directions coming from the EU. And when we look into the EU taxonomy, we can see that several chapters contain parts that concern or relate to building operations. Above all, that is, of course, Chapter 7, Construction and Real Estate Activities. However, unfortunately, there isn't one single dedicated chapter in the taxonomy that clearly addresses the operation and maintenance of buildings. So in the case of construction of new buildings, we have one separate section, and for renovation of existing buildings, we have one separate section. So that's quite clear what you need to comply with. But in our interpretation of the taxonomy, we found that 2 chapters, that is 7.3 and 7.7, could be related to operation and maintenance of buildings in a clear way. And if I show you our requirements again, we found that the following of our requirements can be connected to the EU taxonomy more directly. So if we start with Chapter 7.7 in the EU taxonomy, this is covered by the requirements for 013, risk analysis of climate change, and 014, adaptation to a changing climate. That is the climate change adaptation requirements that I went through. And as previously mentioned, we have tried to align these requirements and the levels of the requirement as far as possible with our understanding of the EU taxonomy. So looking at the purchasing of sanitary tapware, which is also a part of Chapter 7.3 in the taxonomy, we have that included as well, as I told you earlier. That is 025, as you can see marked on the slide. And if we continue to look at then Chapter 3, Annex 1 in the taxonomy, it is not as clear as Chapter 7.7, since it's a mix of several different activities. But we have evaluated that it is not feasible as an ecolabel to mandate requirements for all categories listed there in Chapter 7.3. However, what we have seen is that buildings that will need to enhance their energy performance in the requirement for the energy action plan, they may align their measures with the limits in the EU taxonomy. However, this is not something that is controlled in the generation of our criteria, but since there is a potential that the licensee can show this themselves with help from our criteria, then this box is, well, dashed, and that is 08, as you can see. So, yeah, the EU taxonomy is kind of complicated, as you probably know, those of you who are working with it, and even more here in the operations, since it is not so clear what sections you actually have to refer to. But this is at least the overall picture that I would like to give you today. And I think if you have more questions in detail here on the taxonomy, I would recommend that you reach out to the national representatives and have a direct dialogue with them. As they can also reach out to me or somebody else in the organization if you have further questions. So I think that this was actually everything we planned to show you on this session today, as far as I remember. Yes.
Yes.
And then,
please, Tinus.
yes, so I think we can move on to the questions as far as I recall.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stinus, for that good presentation and insight into these criteria. A lot of exciting environmental and climate topics handled in this criteria set that we very much look forward to working with you on. So now I will give the word to Joel that will handle the Q&A section of this webinar. So Joel, are there any questions?
Thank you, Björn Olav. Yes, we have a few questions in the Q&A section. So let's go through all of them, I think. And also, if you have any questions now that just pop up, feel free to add them to the Q&A section. We have time to go through a lot more if you have them, so feel free to add. But if I start from the beginning, there's actually a question that I think is very related to the last part you discussed, Stinus, about the EU taxonomy. And the question is, why don't you think that the EU taxonomy is ready for the implementation for buildings in use, as all the criteria are defined? So do you want to elaborate or add anything to what you previously talked about, Stinus, in regards to this question?
I have to say that as you might saw on the first slide, I'm the temporary project lead here on this one, and it was my colleague that did this more detailed mapping of the EU taxonomy. But to my understanding, it was found not so clear that, well, one thing is, it was as I showed before, we found more sections that could be related, and we have picked out the parts that we found were relevant to implement and that could be implemented on a reasonable level. But we have not found that it is as clear as, for instance, with new buildings where you have one separate section clearly related to that activity. So I think that is the best answer I can give you for now. And I'm sure that this is described more in detail also in the criteria document and also in the background with regard to the implementation of the EU taxonomy. I hope that helped a little bit, at least.
That we will, and I can add on, Stinus, that this is of course a field that we will follow closely in upcoming weeks, months, and years to make sure that we will implement it where it's possible.
Great, thank you. And after that, we have actually two questions that are both related to what building types can be certified for building operations. So I think it would be most efficient. They can be answered at the same time. So the first question is if the label isn't suitable for warehouses or industry buildings. And the other question is, how specific is the listing in Chapter 2 of the criteria when it comes to types of buildings that can be certified? For example, is it possible to certify operation of official buildings like police stations, prisons, museums, and other cultural buildings?
Well, as Stinus showed a slide in his presentation stating the types of buildings that has been included in this criteria document, and that is residential buildings, office buildings, educational buildings, and buildings for health centers and clinics. So we always do an interpretation of if the building can be included in one of these categories when we are in dialogue with the companies, and we of course try to include it if we can. But if we see that the use of the building is very different to the environmental requirements that we have set, then it's of course difficult to include it. But if it's somewhat related to these building categories, we would strongly recommend to be in touch with us to evaluate if it can be Nordic Swan Ecolabeled with the building service.
And I would like to say as well that I think the list is relatively specific. It's on page 5 in the criteria document. So, for instance, warehouses and industry buildings, they are not included. That is clear. Whereas if you take a look at the other examples you had, well, I would say police stations. I'm not an expert, but that probably depends. Are they quite similar in that case to an office building, for instance, or are they not? Prisons, that would be no. Museums, most likely a no as well. Cultural buildings, maybe that also kind of depends what. But if you have a look at page 5, it is relatively clearly stated. And then, as Bjørn Olav said, please reach out to the national representatives because when we do a criteria like this, then we try to limit our scope somehow to make sure that we have relevant requirements for all the building types in question. But maybe we have missed something that is very closely related to, let's say, office buildings and just need some minor adjustments. Then, of course, that would be interesting to have. But in the case, for instance, of a warehouse, then it is not closely related. So that is not something that will happen in this generation of the criteria. But maybe in the next, who knows?
We try to be pragmatic and practical. It's about the environmental effect and how we can contribute in that sense. So if we,
great breakdown of the question of the building types, guys. And good that you also mentioned, I think, Stinus, that this is for this generation, and then there has to be a scope, and it's not impossible to add that more building types will be added in future generations if it's deemed relevant and efficient for the environment. So
and
great.
That's a good point, Joel. Just to build on that, that's actually just what we did for new buildings recently, adding new building categories to always looking at how we can be relevant for more building types.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that, Bjørn Olav. And after this, we have a question related to energy. Can you share experiences about the business case for resources used for classification compared to the benefits in i.e. lower energy consumption or other operational optimizations, which I think is related to the energy area?
I will need to toss that to you, Stinus, if you have any insight.
Yeah, I'm just reading the question to myself. Hold on.
Yeah. While Stinus is reading, I can just add that if you don't get an answer to your question or you have a question afterwards, please reach out to us. And
This is a question from Morten Rønberg Ejby. And I am not completely sure, but maybe he's asking about the energy performance certificate classification, as that may not apply to all buildings. Am I right, Morten, or what are you? Maybe you can just jump in and elaborate a bit.
Yeah, I can put on your microphone, Morten, if you want to. There. No, maybe I couldn't.
Or maybe just respond in the chat if it's correctly.
Yeah, I'll give a thumbs up, Morten.
If Morten is
Well,
still.
and I will think I will answer more general that if you look at our energy section, it requires several different things. So some of them are related. For instance, this energy action plan. Here, what you need to do depends on the overall performance of the existing buildings. So there you need to have this, energy classification. But you will also need to work with the other things he mentioned, so lower energy consumption or operational optimization. So it's not either or; it's kind of both in our case. So I cannot really say anything general about the business case, and I think it also depends a lot on the building in question. So you can have a building where you have like some really good potentials that for some reason has not been done yet, and you can have a building that is quite well optimized already, and then obviously there's not so much to gain there. But our approach here has been to try to do some kind of standardization so that all are working with all areas and get the building optimized within the different aspects possible, really. So that was a very general answer, but I hope that was somewhat beneficial.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sinus. Some more questions have rolled in about how many buildings or how they are added in the application. We have a question from Ari. Can you get this in bulks of buildings, the eco-label? For example, for municipalities to get eco-label for their kindergarten buildings, all of them. So if, how we work with that.
If you can Swan label the building operations for all kindergartens in the municipality, was that the question?
Yes, to my interpretation.
Yeah. That would be very much possible, and the system is the fee system, for example, is stimulating to doing exactly that. So you can apply for 5 buildings at the same time, and just divide up the total number of kindergartens, for example, in that way. So applying for 5 buildings each time. So that would be possible. And it's usually a smart way to do it as well, because there could be synergies between the buildings that could make the process documenting more effective if there are similarities in your operations. So very much so.
And I would like to add, and that is maybe also the answer for the next question, really, the one from Peter Book, that yes, you can apply and you can have several buildings, but of course there are some requirements that are quite general and that can cover some basic procedures for lots of different buildings. But then there are also some very building specific things that you need to document. Well, the energy performance of that specific building, or the systems in that specific building, or let's say whatever the cleaning company used in building A and not in B, that can vary. So you will have a bulk of requirements where you have good synergies, and then of course you'll have some building specific parts. And the intention behind this is, of course, that if we are to move something on the specific buildings, if we are to actually improve each and every building and not just create like a general standardization scheme. That is not the intention. We want to gain some environmental benefit, and that's why we also need to go down on a building level and have some specific requirements. But it's perfectly possible to apply for more buildings, as long as you show those specific things for the specific buildings.
Yeah, it was evaluated early in the development process of the criteria, if it should be on a company level or a building level. And as Stinus states, it made much more sense to put the criteria on a building level, both from a environmental perspective and a traceability perspective.
Yes, great, thanks. And I see we also got a question in the chat, and as there's no more questions in the Q&A section right now, I will quickly just jump to there. So the question is if you can certify part of a building. Idea if we have a big building with different kinds of services in it. And for example, in BREEAM in use, you can exclude specific parts and only certify, for example, hallways and services.
I think that is something we would need to evaluate in the concrete case, as we do with our criteria for new buildings as well. We're very used to handling those kind of issues. So if you have that kind of project, please just be in touch with us, and we will look at the project and see how the criteria can apply to the building.
Yes, a great answer, Björn Olav. Yeah, so no more questions right now. But as I said before, if you have any that you just think of right now, just write them in the Q&A section. I also saw that there was a question earlier in the presentation in the chat about defining white goods that was answered by another participant. It's for example, fridges and washing machines and such. And there's a specific requirement I can mention in the criteria with the list with all the different types of white goods that is covered.
Yes, and I can just elaborate a bit on that. That it is in general, it's household appliances and some professional kitchen appliances, but they are all, defined specifically. So, for instance, stating washing machine, well, what is the energy label required there? So it is all in requirement 012, and that will be per page 17 if you want to have a more detailed look there.
Yes,
Perfect.
thanks, Stinus.
So it looks like the Q&A is coming to an end, Joel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems people are happy, have all their question marks being sorted out.
As far as
we're
not seeing anyone.
Yeah, as of right now, at least.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Joel, and thank you, Stinus, and thank you to myself. And thank you all for very good questions. We are happy to answer more, and please be in touch with us if you have any questions. And these are the people that you can reach out to as a starting point in each Nordic country. So Bergpora for Iceland, Joel here in Sweden, Henrik Hogård, which I know it's with us today from Denmark, Una Saarinen from Finland, and myself, Björn Olav in Norway. So you will have the email addresses here, and there is also contact information on our national web pages. So yeah, please be in touch. So thank you very much for staying with us this 1 hour. It's been a pleasure waking up to this morning, and we very much look forward to hearing from you. And have a great day.